There is a very simple reason why we don't have Stargate, according to MGM insiders. And that reason? Jennifer Salke. She actively blocked it, even going against her boss's orders to do so. Welcome to the Tachyon Pulse podcast.
Our Tachyon pulse has been unable to completely penetrate the anomaly.
Okay, so now Jen Salke has actually left Amazon. It seems that a few of the employees at Amazon MGM Pictures are willing to now be a little bit more honest about her regime. Now, some of these things we actually heard rumblings about over on here on the Scitrek channel over a year ago, but we never quite got the full picture. But now it is emerging. And to explain it, I am going to go back a little bit to the beginning. So, bear with me. There's a lot. So first of all, Amazon bought MGM. During the process of this going through the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and the FCC, the Federal Communication Commission, Amazon was basically telling the bosses over at MGM that they were going to be allowed to continue to produce TV shows and movies the way they wanted. And one of the things they were doing at the time was planning for Stargate's return under Brad Wright. Now, Pam Abdy and Mark DeLuca, who did not stay at Amazon MGM very long after this happened, were told, crack on, start doing some development work. We want your ideas. We have bought MGM for the creative team that you've built. We love MGM, Amazon was saying. So, they did do a load of development work on Brad Wright's project, and they had a couple of other scripts for a return of Stargate to our screens with a continuation TV series. Now, we did later find out that Mark Fergus was involved in sort of developing a script, and that was the script it seemed MGM was preferring over Brad Wright, even though they continued to fight for Brad Wright, but Amazon had basically said, look, we don't really like that. We'd like you to look at other options. And they went as far as doing some artwork for what the series would look like, etc. They did a bunch of development work. The regulators approved MGM's sale to Amazon, and immediately the hammer dropped. Amazon started letting go of people, and it very, very quickly became apparent that Amazon had no intention of fulfilling its promises, and they were not going to allow MGM to continue working on projects like they'd been told they would. Instead, MGM was completely absorbed into Amazon. There were loads of redundancies. Anybody on a short-term contract was just let go. That contract just was not renewed. And Pam Abdy and Mike DeLuca left for Warner Brothers almost immediately. I'm told that was by mutual consent because Jen Salke wanted to take over, and basically because they'd both been lied to and they didn't want to stick around to see what was happening next. Warner Brothers offered them a job and they took it. Now, that was when things kind of started to go wrong for Stargate. MGM had been working on this, but Amazon flip-flopped for about 12 months. This really takes us till early 2023, where they could not decide. Jen Salke was being charged by her boss, Mike Hopkins, to start delivering up to 12 cinematic movies a year. They announced they were going to be spending £1 billion a year on cinematic movies, something that they have recently reconfirmed and doubled down on. Jen Salke was directed to start using the MGM IP and to push forward with things like Stargate. She knew she needed to do so many cinematic movies a year, and she pushed for Stargate to be one of them. Mike Hopkins had always been pushing this from day one. He has mentioned Stargate in several interviews in the run-up to Amazon purchasing MGM. They talked about Bond, they talked about Stargate, they talked about RoboCop and other IP within the MGM franchise. Now, we actually found out just over a year ago that Mike Hopkins was really not happy with the way Jen Salke had then managed that IP, because by that point, they hadn't really done anything with it. They hadn't done anything with Stargate. Bond was still spinning its wheels. RoboCop was really directionless. And the only thing that they'd really sort of got a plan on from the MGM archive was Spaceballs 2, the sequel. So, what we didn't know at the time was that actually Mike Hopkins was so unhappy with Jen Salke that he removed her power to greenlight projects. She no longer had the ability to make the final decision on movies and TV series. We're now finding out, and this has been reported on Deadline, etc., that actually Mike Hopkins was very unhappy with the way things were going for more than just the reason that MGM that cost 8.5 billion and because of Bond were not going in any direction. He was very unhappy because Jen Salke had an agenda within Amazon MGM Pictures. And this really is the crux of the problem. So, just to go back a little bit, Courtney Valentini was hired at the end of 2022, early 2023, as the new head of movies. And one of the early things Jennifer Salke did was directed her to start working on a Stargate movie as well as a couple of other projects. Now, we heard that that movie got as far as some early development work and was going to be filmed in Poland. We even hear that there was some very early mock-ups of some of the set stuff. We got a source that actually saw the very early mock-up of a Stargate being built. Now, we're told that these wouldn't have been appearing in the movie. They were literally the very, very early sort of mock-ups to sort of figure out how would we get the Stargate to work, what would it look like on screen, this sort of thing. So it was really early work. At that point, we're told they did have talks with the director. There was 3 that was actually got down to the final stages, all names that you know, I did videos on it at the time, and they had agreed on one, but they were going through the process of sort of like finalising the contract. They did have a script that was written by Mark Fergus, and they had started casting, but the casting was basically going to be a bunch of actors that you'd know from TV shows, but you don't know their names. It was not A-listers. This project only had a budget of around $70 to $80 million, and a lot of that was going to be on the screen via CGI, etc., rather than paying any actors £2-3 million quid each. So, it wouldn't have had any legacy actors in, is what we're being told. And the storyline apparently was specifically designed and perceived so that it could exist within the SG-1, SG-A, SG-U universe, but didn't necessarily reference it. So, the argument of do we do a continuation or do we do a reboot was kind of being kicked down the road. The plan was basically to do a movie that was both and neither, that could be a continuation but wasn't necessarily. Now, whatever you think about that plan, at least it would have rebooted the franchise and at least we would have moved forwards. What stopped it? Well, at the time we believed it was just because of the strikes, but now we're being told actually Jen Salke was never really happy with the decisions Courtney Valentini had made and was pushing for a female writer and a female director to take over the project. That's been her agenda throughout her time at MGM Amazon. She's been trying to push for a lot of female writers, directors, etc., and push them forwards. And any projects that had things attached that were either written by a female, whatever, were given some preference. That has basically led to Amazon MGM not really pushing for something like Stargate. Now, Mark Fergus got involved, and we dropped that exclusively before everybody else. Mark Fergus got involved basically at the end of The Expanse. He was a writer and producer, etc., on that show, executive producer. And when The Expanse ended, they basically said to him over at Amazon, what do you want to do? And he said, I'd love to have a go at Stargate. I think it's a brilliant project. I'd love to give it a go. So he got involved and he was going to basically be the showrunner, etc. That basically immediately, and this is ridiculous, I can't even believe I'm saying it if I'm honest, but that basically meant that as far as Jennifer Salke was concerned, it wasn't a priority. She was pushing for other projects to be pushed forwards instead. Basically made verbal promises that Jen Salke was not fulfilling. Mike Hopkins did see that they spent 8.5 billion quid on MGM, and there was 3 or 4 big franchises over at MGM that they desperately wanted to exploit. And Mike Hopkins basically, from day one, said Stargate was one of those top 4 or 5 things that they needed to get on with.
Our tachyon pulse has been unable to completely penetrate the anomaly.